Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
In this episode, I talked to my physical therapist about a wide array of topics, including his radical new perspective on thinking about pain. We also discussed the difference between pain and injury, the pursuit of joyful activities, and the potential benefits of sprinting. One thing to note, at some point I reference guys, but please know that the advice is useful for women and men. I had a cold at the time, so I'll sound a little different. This week's bonus material is a fun conversation with my guest about working out to look good naked. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Charlie Merrill. The creator of the Merrill Method, Charlie is a Boulder-based physical therapist who specializes in multiple treatments to help his patients restore mobility, reduce pain, rehabilitate an injury, or simply live a healthier, more fit life. Welcome, Charlie.
Thanks for having me, Pete. I'm really excited to be here to chat with you.
So, Charlie, what does it mean to you to live a remarkable life? So when you hear that phrase, what does that mean?
Gosh, it's like what comes up for me is like full hedonism, and then maybe like take it down a notch. No,
are you serious?
No, I don't think so. I think there's some components of like finding things in your life that give you joy and trying to do as many of those as you can. But I guess if I really drill down, it's like being challenged in different aspects of my life, both professionally, like from a business standpoint. With my family, with my kids, like, being challenged in that way. And then, in athletics, I think finding that edge of always trying to accomplish new goals, trying to learn new skills, learn more about your health. And I think if I can fill those three different variables and feel like I'm growing and I'm challenging myself, I think that feels where I want to be. I would define that as kind of a remarkable life. I think you throw travel in there too, to help with that growth process. And
yeah, I think you once sent me an email. I have sent you an email once asking about supplements, and I think about that. You sent me a very thoughtful response, like way more thoughtful response than I would have sent.
I hope you remember it.
Well, it was fun because it was a little cheeky. You're like, instead of taking vitamin D, I will go outside with my shirt off for 20 minutes. And instead of vitamin C, I drink margaritas and
prevent scurvy.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things that you closed with was this sort of idea about, and you use this term, to pursue a growth path. And that has always kind of resonated with me. Mm-hmm. When you have a choice, it's not a matter of choosing necessarily a path that's easier, but one that's going to allow you to flourish, to develop, whether it be in the professional box, in the relationship box, or in the physical box,
right? As
you were referring to.
Yeah.
So with my guest, Anthony Full, who's my barber, I told a story about the movie Limitless. Are you familiar with the movie Limitless?
No, I don't know it.
So it's a Bradley Cooper movie from a bunch of years ago, maybe 7-8 years ago.
He has superpowers. He
takes a drug that makes him limitless.
It's familiar.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what is interesting about what they did with that script is, so he basically takes this drug that makes him a genius,
right?
More or less. And you're able to see how he systematically and quickly changes his life as a result of it. And so one of the first things that he does is he tidies up his house. And then one of the next things he does is he gets a haircut. And so Anthony and I talked about how transformational haircut is.
Sure.
The third thing that he does is he starts working out. So there's a scene of him doing like sit-ups in a gym, kind of a thing.
Rocky Balboa style. Like
if you were a genius, what are the things that you would do to make your life better? And it's like, one of the first things is like work on your fitness.
Yeah.
Work on your health. And so that brings us here. It's part of the reason why I chose you to be an early guest here.
Yeah.
And so just allow me to just talk for a moment about my perspective about health and fitness for a moment. And then I want to get your perspective. So, I ask, what does it mean to live a remarkable life? My personal belief is that there are multiple paths to living a remarkable life. That any one path that might be good for one person might not be good for another person, right? So you mentioned family, right? This is a podcast which for now or forever, someone has decided, I don't want to have a family.
Yeah.
Right? I'm delaying this and that. So while that's a path for a remarkable life for you, it might not be for someone
And you could
else.
also think of it as family. It doesn't have to be kids. It could be family, like in a larger sense.
It's true. Yeah. Community.
Friendships. Like I think all those things fall into a similar like relationship.
Are you saying we're family?
Bucket. Of course. Pete.
So, and then other paths are creative paths. And as you mentioned, you jokingly mentioned pleasure, right? So that's a path to living a remarkable life, et cetera. But what I believe underlies whatever path you decide to walk, I believe this notion of health and fitness is foundational. That is, that having a strong body, and then as a result, a strong mind, a healthy immune system. I'm saying this getting over a terrible, terrible illness.
It's all connected, as you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having this notion of good health and fitness is a foundational element, regardless of whatever path you decide to walk, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And thus, if you're pursuing a remarkable life, one of the first things after your haircut and tidying up your house,
it's not going to be supplements.
It's not going to be supplements. That's right. And so I wanted to sort of start by talking to you about the sort of basics of health and fitness. What are the foundational ideas, in your opinion, of health and fitness? I mean, we've talked a lot about this stuff. I've read a lot about this stuff. But one of the things that I like about you is I feel that you have a grounded, reasonable view of this topic. And I'm hoping you will prove me right now.
No pressure.
Yes.
The word that comes to me is almost like moderation. It's the first word that comes to me when you ask that question. You think of these factors that you hear people talk about. One might be sleep. One might be food. One might be exercise.
Sure.
One might be sex. One might be travel. You sort of look at all those things and you say, well, gosh, I need to be sleeping 8 hours a night, and I need to be eating super clean all the time, and I need to have my exercise dialed. And it starts to feel like a lot of pressure. It starts to almost feel like the opposite of hedonism, where all of a sudden you have all these expectations of yourself.
It sounds like work.
It sounds like work, and
Yes.
it's a lot of pressure. And the reason I said the word moderation is because I think all of those things are important, but I think that if you put too much pressure on any of them, it starts to become imbalanced. So there are going to be nights where you get 5 hours of sleep because you're working too much. There are going to be times when you have a crappier diet because you're traveling or whatever. And part of being sort of like feeling good about your health and wellness is that you're not judging yourself too harshly for messing up in any one of those areas, but you're rather trying to do all of them pretty well.
Okay.
And I think if you can do all of those things pretty well, you're going to be a pretty remarkable person.
Okay, so let's isolate these. So let's talk about the first three, because I think those are the ones that people most associate with health and fitness: sleeping, eating, and exercise. Mm-hmm. Right. So some form of rest and recovery, I guess, more generally, eating and exercise.
Right.
So my reaction to what you're saying is, this sounds like a guy who works with a lot of highly motivated, borderline elite athletes in Boulder, Colorado.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, so the notion of moderation sounds like pretty reasonable. Like, hey guys, don't be so hard on yourself because you didn't get 8 great hours of sleep last night, and you decided to have a burger last night, instead of a salad with salmon. Don't beat yourself up about it, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think let me be clear about
Okay.
that. I think if you're a pro athlete, the rules are different, and you're signing up for a different reality with regard to your moderation.
Sure.
At that point. That said, if you follow tennis, you see a guy like Federer who lives his life in a more robust way than a guy like Djokovic who lives like a monk.
Okay.
And both those guys are extremely talented tennis players, but one has the belief system that he needs to live super clean, and the other one has the belief system that a little bit of happiness actually helps his performance.
I see.
So it's different for everybody, but for the average person, I think moderation is important.
Okay, but let's take the average. Here's the problem is I don't think that the average person, moderation's the problem. So bear with me.
I hear you, yeah.
Right?
Go on.
So like obesity rates, the amount of fast food people eat, their poor sleep hygiene and poor habits, right? And so let's take a sort of segmented approach.
Sure.
Right? And let's just take a guy who's listening who wants to kind of kickstart this stuff, right? Like,
right.
He's never really thought about his health and fitness because he's always been kind of young, and now he's heading into his 30s. His body's starting to change. He's losing some of that youthful edge that he had, and now he's thinking, oh, okay, sleep, eating, exercise, the basics of that in terms of foundational kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
I'm curious about.
Yeah, well, then you get into sort of the science of habit, because if you're on the other end of the continuum, where you're not using moderation because you're extreme at the unhealthy end,
yes,
then you're starting to talk about getting into building new habits in all of those different domains. And we know that habit can take a while to build. For some people, they have all this discipline and they can do all those things at once. They're like, I'm cleaning it up, starting today, I'm doing all of it.
Yeah, that's hard to do.
It's hard to do. You're talking about Limitless. The
you
Limitless
got to be a
movie
genius
again.
to be able to like switch these things.
And I think we all, personally, like I have moments in my life where I feel this flow where I'm like, I'm just killing it right now in all these different areas. And other moments where I feel like I'm not in that state and I can't find it and I'm struggling. The goal in those cases is really to start building habit incrementally, small bits at a time.
Okay, so if you had to choose which one to start with.
That's a great question. I would say start with the one that feels moderately challenging to you. Don't start with the one that's super easy, and don't start with the one that feels impossible.
Oh, that's interesting.
Start with the one that's kind of in the middle, that you feel like is attainable. It's like right at your edge. It's attainable, but it's not going to be impossible for you to do. Start with that one, knowing that you can do the easy one later. Start building some success so you feel good about yourself, and then tackle the one that feels a little bit bigger later. If that's food, save that.
Okay.
Maybe start to make incremental changes around the edges, but nail sleep if that feels like it's within your wheelhouse.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that answer.
Well, as a scientist, social scientist, you may have a different perspective on that.
If I had been asked that question, I'd be like, get your sleep in order.
Yeah, okay.
That would have been my reaction. But I like the idea that you should tailor it.
You're sort of weighting the importance of different things. If you're dealing with health issues, then it might be a different answer. You might say, what's the risk factor that's going to improve that health issue the fastest?
Okay. I'm glad you brought this up, because let's return to some of these sort of basics of sleeping, eating, and exercise. Because one of the things that you've had a profound effect on my life as an athlete. I still consider myself an athlete.
Always.
I'm always sort of walking around with some, what I would have said, injury. But you've convinced me is I'm walking around with some form of pain. And as we've talked about, I mean, you really are, I consider you much more than a physical therapist. You're an expert on the topic of pain. And you were telling me, for example, in your practice, upwards of 80 to 90% of the clients you see who are complaining of pain have no discernible injury.
Structural problem. Yes.
Right.
And that's not just in my practice. That's across multiple studies, large numbers of people. Yeah.
So if you think about, you're taking your first steps to living a remarkable life, I think one important thing to try to tackle is the pain that you're in and your relationship to pain and how you think about pain. In part because, if you're in pain, you're it affects you. It affects your immune system. It affects your happiness. It affects
your behavior,
your
feelings,
sleep,
your thoughts,
how you eat.
Absolutely.
Right? Like people, you know what I mean? Like people call it comfort food for a reason, right? And
Absolutely.
we know that no one eats salmon and salad as comfort food. And so I want you to talk a little bit about this notion of pain and give people a different perspective on how they might think about it, because folks who are listening have a bad back. You know what I mean? They've got a shoulder injury.
Right.
Or what? Again, I use the term injury, but they have shoulder pain or they have neck pain or they have whatever this is. How to start thinking about this idea, if you give kind of a primer.
Yeah. Well, I live in a deep rabbit hole right now of this, so we could talk for hours about this topic.
I know we could do a whole pod on this.
You may need to reel me in. Okay. You may need to kind of keep me directed with regard to what you think your audience want to hear about. Let's start by saying what you just shared which is this idea that pain and soft tissue damage are not always connected. In fact, they're rarely connected. So most people have pain in the absence of actual body injury. And this is a paradigm shift that is coming, but is very slow to sort of work its way into society. You think of the tech boom. What was that, 80s, 90s tech boom?
It's the late 90s.
This is like massive societal and economic growth in our world. The way we look at health and the way we look at medicine, the way we look at pain, I think is going to be the next sort of growth path with regard to benefit to society and benefit to the economy. Because it's such a radical paradigm shift in the way we look at and understand pain and injury and even medicine in the last really only 10 years. I mean,
you're definitely heading down the rabbit
progressing
hole
fast. But I wanted to share that because it's just that important, and most people don't know how that works yet. So let's take your average person with low back pain. 80% of people will have low back pain some point in their life, and pain is scary, right? When we have pain, the first thing we do is we catastrophize. We say, oh, I must be hurt. I must have a herniated disc, slipped a disc, whatever the language you use. My dad had a bad back. My mom had a bad back. I'm going to end up, I'm not going to be able to exercise again. Like, we catastrophize. Mm-hmm. It's terrifying. And pain is scary. And knowing the rules about how pain works can really help people to relate to it in a different way, to really understand it in a different way, to bring down fear. And what we find is that if there's less fear around fear of body, fear of health, there's always less pain. We're in a pain epidemic in this country right now. 1 of 4 people are in chronic pain, depending on the stat you look at. And that number's higher than cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer combined. Mm-hmm. We spend more money on pain than we spend on those 3 things combined as well. So it's a real problem. It's a real epidemic. And it's important for most people to know that structural injuries, soft tissue damage injuries are super rare. Usually if you have them because there's some trauma. But 9 out of 10 people in my practice have no clear mechanism of injury when they come in to see me. 9 out of 10 have no reason that their pain started. They're just walking along, or they woke up and the pain started. Or they played basketball yesterday and the pain started the next day, and they attribute it maybe to playing basketball or whatever it is. And of course you want to be able to confirm somehow that you didn't truly hurt yourself, because that does happen.
Sure.
But it's the exception rather than the rule. Mm-hmm. And I think the more of us that know that and understand that and can trust that, the more we'll find that these pains, these normal pains that we have, and all pain is normal, happens to all of us, that we move through them more quickly. We move past them more quickly, and our nervous system lets go of that pain experience.
So it suggests a different form of treatment than what I think the average person would do, which is, so to me, there's 2 options. One is you go to a doctor and you say this, and you point to some part of your body and you say, this hurts.
Right.
And then that person diagnoses it with some injury and then provides some treatment for it.
Yeah, the current biomedical model is, let's look for a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Let's look to put a label on it and look to see what's wrong.
Yeah, it works very nicely with an insurance-based system.
It does.
Because you have to know that you have a ligament strain, for
Absolutely. I think the biggest change in how we look at this is that we know that the brain drives all pain. So whether you just got hurt, you broke your leg, sprained your ankle, or whether you've had pain for 10 years, the brain makes a decision whether that's important enough to create pain or not, to give you a warning that something's wrong. Knowing that the brain is making that decision and not the local soft tissue is important, because it helps us reframe what's happening when we have pain.
So the other thing I was going to say is the other alternative to this is you avoid the pain, right? So that means is you just stop doing, it hurts when I do this. And then the joke is, well, then don't do that.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's the fear-based sort of behavior change that you see with a lot of people in pain, when really the science supports that, except for in extreme cases where rest is indicated, movement is actually better for you. Motion is lotion, is the term. And it brings blood flow and it brings healing and it normalizes, the nervous system and reduces fear for most of us. So bed rest is old school.
Yeah. Crutches are old school.
Crutches are old school. I mean, some of us need crutches. You break your leg.
Sure.
You need crutches, but that heals. It heals in 6 to 8 weeks. It's predictable. Like most of our soft tissue damage injuries, our body has this remarkable capacity to heal, unlike our car or our house. It heals. It's amazing.
It's amazing.
And we don't trust that enough. We don't trust that, like, my body's going to take care of this, then I'm going to be okay. That's one reason people get stuck in pain long after soft tissue damage has healed.
Yeah, so I'll give you my personal experience with this. I've talked to you about this before, but I was turning 40 and I had a bad back. And I had had a bad back for 25 years.
Yeah.
I had heard it playing football in high school. And I would have heard it probably anyways. Like, it wasn't, again, a moment where I got hit or something like that. I was just a lanky kid who grew 6 inches and put on 65 pounds, in high school. Like, that's just what happens.
Yeah.
And this is a common occurrence for guys with my kind of build. So I was turning 40 and I was contemplating what life would be like at 70 with this back. It was a problem. It was getting to be such an issue that I had trouble standing to teach for too long. I would have to sit down in class while I was teaching. And I just was like, I have to do something different, kind of thing. And what I decided to do was make that my number one priority in life. Like, I was like, this is the most important thing.
It was affecting your life massively.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And the future was dark.
Right.
It was dark. And so now I can't exactly say what was the magic thing. I have, but one I believe was just that I took the belief that it could be healed. The fact that I thought I could heal that back. And so, number one thing I did was I improved my posture. So talk about habits. Yeah. So I had to work to start to improve my posture, improve the way I stood. I had bad standing, kind of, I don't know what the right word is, movement.
Your alignment, your posture.
That's right.
Yeah. Movement patterns that you didn't feel like they were healthy.
Indeed. And then secondly, I started strengthening my core. So I'd always heard that, this was an important thing. And I had always used core work as a way to manage the pain. Like when my back would quote unquote go out, one of the paths to helping find some relief was to strengthen my core, to do ab and low back exercises and so on. The third thing that I did was I started doing yoga regularly. So I would go once a week to do yoga, practice that I started that I continue now, which I believe truly helps me in a variety of ways.
Yep.
And then the last thing was actually just coincidence. I didn't choose to do this as a way to help my back, but I think it was like the final linchpin, which was I started sprinting. So at the time I was coaching lacrosse. I was coaching I was an assistant coach for the men's lacrosse team at the University of Colorado. And we brought in a strength and speed coach to work with the guys. And like day one, he taught the guys how to run. And I decided I wasn't going to stand on the sideline. I was going to participate because I was still playing lacrosse at the time. And I was like, geez, if anyone on this field needs this, it's this guy.
I love that.
And so, like teaching you proper hand technique, toe strikes, strides, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then starting a practice around sprinting. And it took a year, but all of those things together had a profound effect. Occasionally I still have a problem that might crop up here or there, but it's usually minor and temporary. Mm-hmm. And my identity about the health of my back is completely different since then. And I think that I go into that long-winded example in part because if I had done the two things that what people normally do, which is, don't test it too much, right? Give it some time to rest and whatever. Yeah. That's not helping because that's actually hurting me because I'm losing strength. And the other one is, let me go to this orthopedist. Let me go to this back specialist.
Get it diagnosed.
Yeah. I mean, look, I got a diagnosis at one point, it's like I've got some spondylosis and I've got whatever, all this kind of thing. But if I'm like, hey, doc, what do I do about it? There's some chance that he goes, well, we've really made some strides when it comes to surgery.
Yeah.
And blah, blah, blah. And I'm not living as good a life if I have back surgery.
Or you get an injection or you get some other intervention.
Whatever those things might be.
I think the challenge with that is it reinforces this notion that your body is broken. Your body's a problem and it needs to be fixed. And after 25 years, your story is brilliant because after 25 years of back pain, the assumption is, well, my back must still be injured. My body must still be a problem.
Yes.
And we know that's not the case. You might have had an injury when you were in college.
And then, I re-injured it at some point, I was 32, moving some stuff.
Yeah, so it flared back up. That's right. And these are normal flare-ups that people have. But to come back to this idea that your body heals itself, those injuries, if they were injuries in the first place, probably healed within a pretty predictable amount of time. A month, 2 months, sometimes 3 months, the longest. And then you're healed. But 25 years later, you still have pain. And you have pain doing things that aren't really dangerous, like standing and sitting and things like that.
Teaching is not dangerous.
Exactly. Maybe it's dangerous in other ways. But from a physical body perspective, it's not dangerous. So I think your story really is great. And you talked about some of the stories, the assumptions that you had that led to this sort of bleak view of the future, which is my body's not going to hold up. You have all these, you use the word believe quite a bit when you were telling the story, which is there's this belief system about what my back is and what it isn't and what's going to happen in the future and what's not going to happen in the future. And those stories alone are really powerful. They have the power to really keep you in pain for much longer than you need to be in pain. So I think the other thing that I want to reflect on is things like core stability and posture. And some of these other variables that give us control, feel like they give us control of our pain, and they do. And I use the word placebo hesitantly because it has sort of a stigma, negative connotation. But placebo is just a variable that works, and we don't really know why yet. So posture and core stability have really fared very poorly in the research. There's really not a great correlation between core stability and pain. There's really not a great correlation between posture and pain. Doesn't mean there's not some benefit to improving those things.
Yeah, well, yeah, because you look better at the beach.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if your belief system is that those things are going to help, then they probably will. Yeah, right. But they somewhat play back into this notion that your body is the problem rather than your brain being the primary driver of these symptoms. Now, sprinting is interesting because sprinting for you had a strong trust or belief that sprinting was going to be fun. It's a joyful activity.
Oh, I love it.
Was going to improve your health.
Yes.
And if you can find those things in your life, especially when you're in pain, that's your way to tap into getting back to being active again and moving past the pain. Because sprinting, if you have a truly bad back, sprinting is not going to be good for your back.
I see.
But you went out and sprinted and it got better.
Yes.
And so that was your way of using a joyful activity to desensitize your nervous system. You had a strong belief all those things were going to help, and they did. Because your brain decided that it was ready to let go. Your brain decided wow, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to go too deep into sprinting because I'm sure I will at some other point.
It could be dancing. It could be whatever the joyful activity is.
No, but I particularly like the idea of sprinting.
Totally.
Right? So if you want a real test of your fitness, sprinting, again, when, look, it helps to do it right. You know what I mean? Like anything, like learning how to deadlift, learning how to sprint. What's amazing is like little kids are sort of good sprinters.
Yeah.
And then we sort of lose that. And we never, like in PE, no one ever teaches you how to run. And yet, like, that's the way to avoid injuries when you're a runner is to actually learn to run well, efficiently. Like you watch these long distance runners, like they're just absolutely incredible. Or you watch these sprinters, everything is completely
They're so efficient,
dialed in.
Yeah.
And the issue is like, if you're going out and sprinting regularly, like it's hard to not start to get in shape.
Right.
And if you want motivation to start eating better, start sprinting, because it is just the most, like, you can be pretty overweight and be a efficient long distance runner. It's like pretty hard to be an efficient sprinter when you're terribly overweight. And frankly, like when you look at like as a guy, I think what most guys, if you were like, okay, describe your perfect body, what would be the perfect body for you? It's like a 100 or 200
like
meter,
an Olympic sprinter.
Like an Olympic sprinter.
Yeah,
like
right.
those guys have like, you know what I mean?
They're jacked, they're lean.
Right?
Yeah,
like,
they're confident, they have swagger.
I mean,
all those things.
Right, they have all those things. Like I mean, of course, you know, look, you should be striving for the best body that your body type can have, but in an ideal perfect world, most people would describe someone who looks like, I don't even know, like, you know, if you're tall, it's Usain Bolt. If you're not tall, it's
Michael Johnson.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of all right.
What you don't want all your listeners to do is go out and start sprinting.
No, I don't.
Because for you, that was a really joyful activity.
That's right.
For somebody else, it might be a disaster.
And it is probably not the place to start.
Yeah, joyful activities.
That's a good.
Make it playful, make it fun, go play.
So I know we could talk more about the pain stuff, but if you were to, here's the problem, I think, is, so I regularly come see you when I'm having some issue, and you help me work through whether it be dealing with the acute issues, and then you give me often movements and things to do to things. But not everybody has a Charlie Merrill and the Merrill Method in their backyard. By the way, folks, you can fly to Boulder, Colorado, and you can rent Charlie for a day. You can do this stuff if you've got deep pockets. But what would be your advice for someone who's just like, God, these guys are so right. I need to take care of X. Like, what are the basic foundational things, if that's like pretty high on their list of like things, something to tackle?
If it's an injury, you mean?
No, it's not an injury. Someone's got, you know what I mean? Like, and they don't really feel like they can go it alone. Like, what resources do you suggest? I mean, you don't have your webinars up yet and all that stuff.
Yeah,
but like,
I understand.
Yeah.
How can you tap into
like who do they
knowledge?
Do they talk to someone? What is the, you know?
Well,
what I mean?
first of all, people fly in to see me all the time, so don't make it sound like it's out of reach.
No, but
because I'm available for sure.
Right.
I love to engage with people and help them, you know, learn about this stuff. We're in a time when there's so much advice available. There's so much free advice on Instagram, on YouTube.
Like, yeah, I know you have YouTube videos about particular things.
They're just great resources. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's not so solid out there, but we're in a time when there's a lot of free information out there for people to consume. So I think starting with someone who's a really knowledgeable, well-known name in whatever thing, you're looking at, and tapping into that person's community and their online information and their, chat rooms and things like that. You want to find someone, if you're a baseball player like Eric Cressy, you want to find someone if you're a CrossFitter like Kelly Starrett. In every sort of domain, whether it's food or sleep, there's an expert that's talking about it for free online. And I would encourage all your listeners to just eat that stuff up.
Okay.
But find good resources, find the person that's at the top of the game.
Mm-hmm. You've given me a book called The Supple Leopard.
Yeah. That's Kelly Starrett's book.
Okay.
CrossFit, OG, physical therapist in San Francisco.
And that's a lot of things about how to approach moving your body and treating your body.
Taking care of your body, recovery, why things go haywire, why they don't. I think it's a good resource for managing your body and learning to move.
Yeah. And so another thing you would say, it sounds like, is find joyful movement.
I love the idea of play. I love the idea of joyful movement as a starting point, because otherwise, again, it just feels like work. It feels like someone else told you to do it, and it's contrived, and it's kind of boring. I always encourage people to really take the time to think, like, what do I really want to do? What would be the first thing I really want to do? I should go run. I should go ride a bike. I should go to the gym and lift weights.
Right.
Like, screw all that.
Yeah, that's why I don't swim.
If you're
I should swim, but
yeah.
I just don't want to swim.
If you're not into that, don't do that. Like, find something else. Like I said, go dancing. Go join a club. Go play tennis. Pick the thing that sort of draws you. And sometimes as I'm problem solving with people, they'll have an aha, and they're like, "That sounds amazing." I introduced pickleball to an older client the other day. He never heard of it. He was like a light bulb went off. He's like, "I have to learn more about that." Pickleball is like a form of like paddle ball. Have you ever played Kadima on the beach?
Yes.
With a ball, it's like that, but on a tennis court. Wood paddle, wiffle ball, smaller court, doubles format, so you're not running as much. And so it's great for people that, that aren't playing tennis anymore, but still like racket sports. You get the eye-hand coordination, you're still moving, you're being dynamic. And for a lot of people, you put them in a context where they have, some arthritic changes in their body, and you say, "Hey, we're going to do some cutting and changing direction and sprinting." And they're like, no way, I can't do that. You put them on a pickleball court, and they're doing all those things. They're lunging to get the ball. They're reaching overhead. They would never do that in a gym setting or in a PT clinic,
right.
But because it's joyful, they can do it.
I think that's actually one of the, your office works out of a CrossFit gym. And so I did many years ago during my first sabbatical, I did some CrossFit. I don't do it, except occasionally some stuff like that with you as part of a treatment or just for fun. I think one of the secrets of CrossFit's success is the community element to it.
Absolutely.
That is that, like, most CrossFit workouts, or WODs as they call them, the workout of the day, are done as a group.
Right.
Like, yes, you could do them alone, but most CrossFit gyms, they're set at particular periods of time in the day. You have to come in and do them with other people. And I think that there's something to that makes that what can be often a brutal experience joyful and exciting and fun and competitive and all that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of CrossFit, let's talk about a few other things. So there's a lot of terms that get sort of thrown around among sort of more knowledgeable practitioners like you. Things like flexibility, mobility, stability, strength, power. And to me, like, if you're not advanced in this, strength and power sound like the same thing. And flexibility and mobility and stability sort of kind of sound like the same kinds of things. And I'm curious if you could talk about those different ideas and then talk about the value of those. Those things.
Sure. Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics as a physical therapist. I work in the world of mobility and stability a lot, and I think of those two things as opposite sides of the same coin. Mobility is your body's ability to move through space through a certain range of motion, and stability maybe.
Say that again, slow.
So I think of mobility as your body's ability to move through space to achieve a certain range of motion. Like, think of how much you can reach your shoulder overhead.
Okay.
The mobility is the amount of movement that you have to get to that end range, whatever your normal end range is.
I see. Okay.
The stability on the other side of the coin is your muscles' ability to control you into that end range. So you see people that have a lot of mobility, they're very mobile at their overhead position.
Okay.
But when you put them there, they don't have great control. They might have pain. They might not be able to support weight. Yeah, you put a dumbbell in their hand. They may not be able to do it. Or you put them in a handstand and they completely collapse because they don't have the muscle control to be able to support their joint, their body in that.
Okay.
And that position.
So mobility would be your ability to get into a handstand. Your stability would be your ability to hold that handstand.
Yeah, that's one way to describe it. So mobility and stability kind of go together. I don't like to have people just work on mobility because then they're building range of movement without muscle control sometimes. Sometimes you can't work on stability in a certain position because they can't get there yet. So you have to work on a little bit of mobility. So I really feel strongly that those two things go together. Now, strength is sort of a different muscle system. I think of strength as like the big muscles, the jocks of the muscle system. The stability muscles are more like the nerdy mathematicians that are super smart and are doing all the fine calculations to determine how to sort of get you into the healthiest position. The big muscles kind of do it without regard for quality of movement. The stability muscles make sure that there's quality there. So they really work together. That's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but maybe you get the idea that you kind of want both. If you're picking up a deadlift, you have muscles that are working very hard to lift that heavy load. You also have smaller muscle systems that are working to make sure that, each spinal vertebrae is moving smoothly relative to the one above and below it, so that they don't shift or, and you don't have pain.
And what about the word power?
Power more brings in sort of this time domain. It gets a little more complex with regard to power, but let's just say power is like the total amount of work done over time. So if your power output is going to be higher if the weight's high and the speed is fast.
I see.
Right? If the weight's high but the speed is slow, you could still have good power compared to a lighter weight with a slow speed.
Okay.
So power is sort of more of an equation.
I see. Yeah, it's like weight times space times time.
Yeah, strength is more like how much force can the muscle produce.
I see.
Yeah.
So we've talked about this idea of things like the difference between doing a strict pull-up and doing what's called a kipping pull-up.
Right.
And why both are important. And how does that relate to these ideas that we've just been talking about? And so for the listener, a kipping pull-up, how would you describe it without visual?
A kipping pull-up is like a gymnast when you see them sometimes start their routine where they go from hanging from the bar and they start to like swing their body back and forth before they get up into like above the bar. Mm-hmm. So a kip is like that body movement that helps you generate momentum to get up onto the bar. Hips forward, hips backwards. You can look it up. There are tons of videos.
I'll put it in the
kipping pull-up versus a strict pull-up where you're just dead hanging and then you just pull from there. Mm-hmm. The equivalent in a lower body movement would be a squat versus a box jump.
Okay.
Where one is more sort of slow and heavy, and the other one is more plyometric, explosive. Depending on the load, the power could be different between those two movements. An air squat is going to generate less power than a box jump because it's slower, but the body weight is still fixed.
I see. And so why do both?
Well, I think you talk about the difference between teaching your tissues to store energy and release them. That's a plyometric movement. You think of jumping. You're squatting, you're teaching your muscles and your connective tissue to store energy, and then you're releasing it into your jump. If you're doing it slow, you're not getting that same energy storage release. So you're not training your tendons and ligaments as strongly. We're starting to geek out here about different stuff. No. I'm using big words now, but the kipping pull-up is sort of equivalent. You're teaching your shoulders, your muscles around your shoulders and your trunk to store energy. You're demanding a lot more of your system to do that kip. Of course, there's more risk that comes along with that, just like there is with any plyometric movement, because you're loading your tissues at a much higher tension. And so I think of that as a progression. Like, a strict pull-up might be first, and then a kipping pull-up might be the next step. And you can, of course, do them at the same time and work them at the same time. But any high speed or high weight movement is sort of the end of the line.
Something you build up to.
I love the CrossFit paradigm because it's so simple, and it starts with move well first, then add repetition, do more of them, and then add intensity, which would be weight or speed. And if you think of any movement in that sort of with those rules, with that context, you're going to do pretty well.
Yeah, my experience with it was positive.
It doesn't even have to be in CrossFit. I just like that. I like that model a lot to apply it to anything, whether it's running or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, to me, my experience with it was largely positive, but what I found myself needing to do a lot of regulating, which was essentially telling the instructor, no, I'm not putting that amount of weight on a bar.
Well, when you take a high performing athlete like you've played sports your whole life, you have a pretty strong body and you have a pretty strong engine, and you put put you into a high intensity context where it's competitive.
Yes.
And you're a competitive guy. It takes a good coach. It takes a really good gym. And it takes a smart athlete that has some discipline to be able to walk that line so you stay in the sweet spot, so you can grow over time. And this gym, CrossFit Roots, where I rent space and I run my business, is one of those gyms. And I really appreciate the gyms that can do that for people like you who are going into it, with a strong engine, strong chassis, and a competitive sensibility.
It's hard to turn it off. Yeah. It took years of experience knowing that like you just got to let your body adapt.
Yeah.
It takes a long time to get fit.
Totally.
Let's talk a little bit more about health.
That's a big word.
Exactly. As someone who feels rather unhealthy right now. Actually, I'm going to use you for just my own benefit at the moment.
Okay.
So I am 10 plus days into a virus, some sort of illness. The worst is behind me, but I'm still not. I'm clearly not back to normal from an energy standpoint, from a symptom standpoint. My voice doesn't usually sound quite like this.
Yeah.
And I know that I will heal. I know how magical the body is. I know I'll heal because I've always healed, and so on. And I have been maintaining good habits. So I've been focused on sleep. I've been focused on staying well hydrated. Mm-hmm. And after like the first few days of illness where I was just eating whatever I could eat just to be able to kind of have energy, I've really been trying to keep my diet, really solid kind of thing. Is there anything else that I could be doing, should be doing in terms of recovering and getting back to sort of a normal baseline?
I think that's a really good question. I talked earlier about how the brain is in charge of all pain. So the brain decides when our nervous system produces pain and we have, a knee discomfort. The brain also is in charge of our immune system. And not only that, but the nervous system that drives pain and the immune system that drives illness are speaking to each other. They're in conversation. So I think in our society, we sort of downplay the notion of psychology, of our sort of emotional well-being as a variable that can help us prevent pain and injury and can help us prevent illness.
Okay.
Let's use your immune system crash as an example. Mm-hmm. So life stress is...
My immune system got body slammed.
Yeah.
Basically.
And I think I commented to you in text the other day about how it seems like your immune system is getting hit right now. Uh-huh. Getting hit hard. Life stress is probably one of the most under talked about variables in terms of health and wellness right now. There's a stat I just read the other day, and I'm going to forget the author's name that wrote this book, but she quotes that 90% of visits to primary care docs and emergency rooms are stress-related illness.
I see. Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that.
It's extremely high. So it tracks pretty well with pain in that regard. So if you're looking at a way to prevent illness, prevent the breakdown of your immune system, and to prevent pain, reducing life stress as best you can is probably the missing variable. If there were 3 legs to the stool or 4 legs, that's the missing leg.
Yes.
And it's stigmatized. It's not talked about. Not everybody likes to admit that they're going through change in their lives or that they're going through hard stuff, but we all are all the time.
Sure. Yeah. And I clearly have, I'm always testing myself. I'm always challenging myself.
Yeah. If you're living a rich life.
That's right.
What was the term you used at the beginning?
Remarkable
if you're
life.
living a remarkable life and you're living at your edge, you're going to be sometimes over, sometimes under that edge.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that that's a variable is important. Not catastrophizing. When I get hurt, I don't worry about it too much because I understand it. When I get sick, I'm a disaster. I'm
right?
I'm all about catastrophizing when I get sick. But I mean, people can see that they get sick when they're stressed, when there's a lot going on at work, when maybe there's a lot of emotion times in their life when things are hard. It's when we tend to get sick more. And that's just normal. So recognizing it, bringing down the fear around it is important. And then trying to manage some of those variables, some of those stressors. You know, it might mean that you work a little less if you can.
Yeah, I can't keep up my normal schedule. I kind of start the day normally, and then by lunch,
yeah, it's our brain. I mean, listen, it's our brain's way of saying, Pete, you've been working too hard. You need to reel it back, and if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it for you.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what pain is sometimes too. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just a way to get your attention.
So what you're saying for me in terms of the recovery is just be easy on yourself.
I think that factors into that psychological domain. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, a really deep topic. When I say like reduce your stress, I kind of sound like an asshole. It's like, who is this guy? Like, you know, there are lots of tools to be able to do that, but there are also lots of variables. Being hard on yourself, expecting a lot of yourself is one of those variables. When we're very hard on ourselves, that's a psychological injury, if you want to say it that way. Yeah. And our immune system can suffer in that situation.
Yeah, you know, I do feel like it's a little bit of a tough situation, again, because what's happening is you can imagine two types of listeners, right? So you can imagine someone who's living closer to me in the sense of pushing himself physically, getting on planes all the time, working on new projects, teaching these challenging classes, and by the way, enjoying all of it.
Of course.
Even though it's hard.
Yes.
Right? It's something that allows me to flourish. Versus the guy who's not stressing and testing himself enough. Who's not on a growth path. You know what I mean? And
sure.
So there's this sort of like, I mean, I actually suspect that guy has other stresses in his life. Sure. But it's not from pushing himself.
Yeah, there may be some depression in that case. There may be sort of a habit around, you know, motivation,
anxiety around
fear of failure.
That's right. Yes, those kinds.
Fear of success. There are all kinds of and you know, you're hitting on all these sort of psychological variables that play into our wellness, our health and wellness. That I just don't think we talk about enough. And
I agree. That's why you and I are talking about this.
Yeah,
right now.
Pain in the immune system. You know, they're bedfellows. And so we need to sort of think of them in a similar way.
Indeed. And so you talked to me about this idea of a total stress score.
Yeah.
As a kind of heuristic for thinking about how's life going right now. And so what is a total stress score to you?
Total stress score comes out of like the world of professional athletics. And honestly, I don't know how old school this term is anymore, but I've always liked it. I've always shared it. It's this notion that our performance is going to be determined by all the stressors in our life. And the higher the total stress score, the lower our performance is going to be. And it's probably realistically a U-shaped.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it's
upside down U.
There's no way
it's an upside down U. There's a sweet spot. But if you get to this super high level, your performance is going to suffer. And that's true whether you're a professional athlete or whether you're in your life. And the total stress score might be made of work stressors. It might be relationship stressors. You know, it could be anxiety or depression. It could be the way you're eating. There are tons of variables that play into this, but the idea is the more you put those stressors onto the pile, the higher your total stress score and the less well you're going to perform. So it's almost like an abstract number for a lot of people, but you'll often see that when your immune system breaks down or when you get pain, that total stress score is a bit high or really high in some cases.
Across domains.
Across domains, it might be one domain is super high and you're just, you know, someone passes away in your life or you move your life across the country or you get a divorce or you break up with a partner. Those are all like one domain, but it's really high in that one domain. So it spikes your total stress score.
I see.
And the other things might also be high, and that just even makes it worse. Those are the times in our lives when our health and wellness suffers.
Right.
And it tracks pretty true to that.
So in closing and reflecting on our conversation, Charlie, I want to ask you what advice you might have for the listener based upon the types of topics that we've been talking about. What are some things that either you want to reinforce or that we might have overlooked that might be useful when you think about improving your health and fitness, dealing with illness, stress, etc., these kinds of topics?
Yeah, I think I come back to this idea of moderation where we started. Like, try to do your best in all those domains to check the box in the way that you think is healthy. Sleeping 5 hours a night is not going to be
healthy.
good.
Yes.
You go out to the dance club one night, it's fine. You're going to be fine.
Sure.
Don't worry about that too much. You go off the rails because you're on vacation, you're eating terribly, it's fine. You're going to be fine.
Sure.
I think the psychological concern or worry about those things almost is worse than doing the thing itself.
Yeah, I see. It's interesting. There are people who talk about there's these I've read it where people talk about, these are guys usually who have very regimented workout schedules. They work out very hard. They eat really clean.
Yeah.
And so on. But yet they have what they call cheat days.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that one day of eating stuff that's not, always super good for you is not a problem at all and actually might be beneficial.
Totally.
Right? That it's good for your body to have to process that on occasion.
Totally.
It's just the problem, of course, is when it turns into a regular thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And our belief system plays into that quite a bit. If you believe X will probably happen.
Yeah, I'll give you my answer to my question.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. I'll give you your answer to my question that you told me.
And then I'll fill it in. That sounds perfect. You're way smarter than I am. So I remember I was complaining of some issue that I had. I can't even remember what it was at this point. And I was walking out of your office, and you basically looked at me and you just said, "Don't baby it." And that was a really useful thing for me to hear, which is, yeah, I know you're having pain in this part of your body, but it's okay. Yeah.
It's going to be
You're
okay.
going to be okay.
You're going to be okay. And if you treat it as if it's this major problem to be worked around and so on, you're not going to be better off.
Yeah, we're robust organisms.
Yes.
I think we don't give ourselves enough enough credit for that. I think we were talking about being an athlete earlier.
Yes.
And I like to remind people that everybody's an athlete. Everybody has an inside athlete. I mean, I see people who are 80 and they've been deconditioned and they've never squatted before or done a lot of activity before, and they all have the capacity to do it. They can all do it. I see people in their 40s that have been scared to death to run. They're terrified. Mm-hmm. And you get them running again. They're like, oh my gosh, I can run. This is unbelievable. I never thought I'd be able to run again. And we sort of forget that we're built to move, and we forget that we're robust, and we forget that we're durable and that we heal.
Yes.
And we get in our own way sometimes around that.
The one caveat that I would put to, not a caveat, but the one admonition that I would make is to be patient, to take it slowly and build to do that. Because I think that there are, again, two errors that people make. One is not going far enough. That's the person who's not running, who could stand to run. The other one is the person who goes out and runs 6 miles on day one. And I think that as someone who, for example, last year decided I was going to build my body back up, it was striking how long it took and how I had a couple setbacks because I was just going back to the way I was always, which is, competitive and let's turn this on. Let's turn it up to 11.
Yeah.
And that I wasn't quite ready to do that, but I recognized that I would eventually be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I just was going to take a little longer than I would have liked it to.
Yeah. I mean, our brain likes change. It just doesn't like it too fast.
Yeah.
Because it'll trigger the alarm. Nervous system, immune system, whatever. Mm-hmm. It'll give us feedback that was too much too soon.
Yeah.
So it's good. It's good that you mentioned that.
Yeah. Just a tendency.
But there are people that break through those barriers quickly and suddenly, and they just didn't think they could do it. And that's kind of a different thing. It's not so much that they maybe they could do it all along.
Yeah. And
they just didn't trust or didn't try it.
Yeah. I also have noticed at times that it's often the improvement's nonlinear.
Absolutely.
It's just
it's always.
It's just
stepwise or
that's
a roller coaster or whatever.
You get this sudden increase at some point that's hard to anticipate.
Totally.
And instead of this slow, steady build that's
yeah.
that you see.
It's important to remember that I'm sort of just as we're wrapping up here, I'm sort of dropping back into like your audience and thinking of your audience and different people being at different places in their lives.
Yes.
And we're talking about this in sort of a way where it's like, you know, it's all possible, right?
Yeah, like look, let's compare two potential listeners, right? You know, some guy who's just out of college, you know, and he's just getting adjusted to some working life versus a guy who's 55 who's just got divorced and getting used to like a solo life.
Yeah.
You know, like those guys might be in very different places physically as a result of this.
Totally.
But yet they still ought to have the same goal, which is to build fitness and good health and good habits.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking like, you know, how, you know, I don't want to take for granted the fact that these things are challenging, these things that we're talking about, sometimes making life change, changing habits. It's hard, as you know.
Well, I have a saying about this.
Yeah. Tell me.
Anything worth doing is going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, if you want to be fit, it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
That's like the biggest lie that marketing tells people. It's never been so easy to get fit.
Yeah.
It's total bullshit. It's like, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be fun. Not to mean it's not going to be rewarding.
Right.
And actually the difficulty is going to make it rewarding.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
it's not easy.
I realize like I spend my days mostly just believing in people. You know, I spend my days like being optimistic and encouraging and hopeful and
being a little bit of a cheerleader.
A lot of us need that. Yeah. So wherever you are in your process, you know, I think believing in yourself is really important. And if you need to find some external sources to help you sort of start to believe in yourself and put one foot in front of the other to start making those incremental changes, you know, that's out there.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people out there that can help you do that.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in doing these things together. You know, if you've got
having
mates
support.
who are interested in this kind of stuff. That stuff.
Friends, professionals, online community, whatever it is.
Whatever it might be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Charlie, this was exactly what I had hoped we would get through and talk about. And I just want to say I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate you too. Do I get to give you a hug now?
No. Yes. All right, we're back with Charlie Merrill of the Merrill Method for a little bit of a bonus conversation. So I am now well, and it sounds like Charlie's a little unwell.
I'm getting back to being well.
You're getting back to being well.
Yes.
So at the end of our podcast session, as soon as it wrapped, you spontaneously said, "Oh, we should have talked about exercising so you look good naked."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's always something that comes up at the end that you wish you'd talked about.
And that's what this bonus conversation is for. So, so I like this idea. As someone who exercises to look good naked,
yeah,
I'm a fan of this idea.
There are lots of reasons to exercise, but that's, I think, a really important one that not enough people talk about.
Okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So, okay, why is it an important reason?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of research on exercise and what the benefits are, from, you know, cardiovascular health to preventing disease to relieving pain to you know, just
feeling energized,
feeling confident in your
sure.
life, feeling energized. There are some other things that we used to think exercise did that we know maybe aren't so true anymore. Like we know that core stability doesn't necessarily prevent back pain. Mm-hmm. So we keep asking these questions.
I've done that. That means I've wasted a lot of time doing sit-ups.
It doesn't mean that doing core stability exercise isn't helpful or doesn't have some benefit, but reducing the prevalence of back pain is not something that correlates well. So then the question that you start asking is, well, why should I be doing core stability exercise? Because it's terribly boring. And it's kind of contrived, and it's not really built in usually to some functional movement that I would do, like picking up a bag of concrete or, you know, doing some type of real movement in my life.
I want to interrupt by making an observation, which is, I've been doing this F45 class 1 or 2 days a week. It's very functional movements.
Totally.
So high intensity, 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off, circuit style, lots of different types of movements.
there's very little abs in F45. And I've always found it perplexing that we're not doing almost any abs at all, at least direct. So occasionally, the most obvious thing you'll do is some sort of twist. So you'll do you'll have like a medicine ball, and you'll tap it on to your right, then you'll turn over and tap it on your left. So you kind of go back and forth, kind of thing. That might be the most common ab-like thing there.
Yeah, they're really smart. They're tricking you into doing ab work because our abs are not an isolated muscle group. They're just like the rest of the muscles in our body, they work together in synergy. And so by doing these functional movements, you're using your abs by definition.
Yes,
and you're going to not only lean out your whole body, which is going to allow you to see your abs better, but you're also going to be building control and strength with real movement that you're going to be doing in your day-to-day life.
Yeah,
so,
there's a lot of stuff. You're holding a medicine ball over your head, and then you're doing a lunge, a backward lunge.
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that requires a lot of stability and control from the muscles in your midsection, and connecting them with what your arms and legs are doing is a really important part of the process. I think it makes you more robust as a person, makes you a more durable athlete that will fatigue less quickly, and it just supports movement overall.
Okay, I interrupted because I was
it's okay.
If I put it together.
But to come back, you ask these questions like, why am I doing core strength? And I think at the end of the day, having a body that looks good is a really important reason to do that kind of stuff. Like, you want to develop the muscles that you want to be able to see. Of course, you need to be able to shed some of the fat that's covering them up. But working on those muscle groups in isolation can be a strategy to start that process.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a reason that most fitness products get sold with before and after photos.
Yeah,
right.
Course.
I mean, that's implicit in this is like your body will look like no one's buying your exercise program if the before and after photos look the same, but in the second photo, you're just a lot healthier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's very motivating. And I think it's why everybody seeks out exercise, despite the fact that we know there are all these other benefits that are very real for people in their lives that might be considered more important if you really took a step back. But we all at the end of the day want to be able to look good with our clothes off, whether we talk about it or not.
Or even look good with your clothes on.
Yeah, with your clothes on, of course.
Yeah. So I exercise for lots of reasons. I mean, some of the reasons I exercise are, injury prevention. I do it in part because I know it helps my thinking.
Yeah.
It helps my emotions. It's a stress reliever. But also to be appealing. Also to feel good about myself when I look in the mirror and potentially to feel comfortable in the bedroom, so to speak, or at the beach or the pool or whatever that kind of thing is.
One of the most interesting things about exercising at a relatively high intensity, even if it's only for 20 minutes, is that we know that we unleash this sort of pharmacy in our brain, and it releases the chemicals that we need in that moment. Could be antidepressant, could be anxiety, could be weight loss, could be appetite control. All of those sort of medicines that we go to the doctor to get, we have those in our brain. And by exercising, we release those naturally into our bloodstream in the appropriate dose. And I think we don't think about that enough. So part of leaning out from exercise is this sort of this chemical release that we get from our brain into our bloodstream.
So there's exercise, but I think, tell me if I'm right about this. My feeling is that if you want to look good naked, yes, it's important to exercise. Like, yes, it's important to have more muscle on your legs and backside and, whatever, broader, stronger shoulders, the classic things for both men and women. The aesthetic side of this. But frankly, you have a layer of fat, and the more of that fat you lose, the more those muscles show up, so to speak. The more aesthetically pleasing, up to a certain degree, of course, kind of a thing. And there was this whole thing about Michelle Obama's arms, right? Like for a week, like Michelle Obama's arms broke the internet. I don't know if you remember this, or people remember this. Well, okay, so how did Michelle Obama get those arms? Well, I'm sure she got those arms by doing push-ups and pull-ups and doing a bunch of other kinds of things where she's moving weights.
Rather than like isolated bicep curl type things.
Yes.
Yeah. Real functional movement.
I think that I think we can agree that I'm certain that the Obamas have an outstanding personal trainer.
Right. Yeah.
But how she really get those arms was that she probably improved her eating. She was drinking less alcohol if she drinks alcohol. She wasn't eating late at night. It's like she had some sort of fast part of her, you know what I mean?
Totally.
That she was going later on the dressing and, you know, skipping dessert. Like the fact is that you can be a very fit individual. You can have those shapely muscles.
Yeah.
You could have strong abs, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if you're not eating well, no one ever sees it.
Some people say eating is most of the equation.
Okay.
I don't
Who
know
are
what
those
the
people?
estimates
Who are those people?
80%. I mean, this is just known in the fitness world that as much as we sell exercise to try to get people looking good naked, it's a smaller part of the process than the way we eat or the way we live our lives.
Yes.
You know, the quality of our lives. But did you have a thought about that?
Well, I want to say things, but I want to hear you. You're the expert.
Okay. I could go on all
I'm
day.
growing though. I'm growing by holding back.
So yeah, I think the trying not to get too superficial about this, because you know the aesthetic is important, but another really important part of feeling good about yourself when you're naked doesn't necessarily have to mean you lose all your fat or get super lean or get ripped abs, right?
Let's be honest. The average person will never have ripped abs.
No, right. And so that's why it's important, I think,
Yeah.
to address the idea of self-esteem is, you know, aesthetics is just a small part of that.
Sure.
But you feeling good about yourself when you look in the mirror has more to do than with just how much muscle you have and how much fat that you've shed off your body. You want to be confident in your body, and exercising is a really important way to not only get strong, to be able to live your life and be an athlete if you want to choose to do that, but it's also really just feeling good about your body as a machine. Or
it works well.
It works well. You're proud of it, almost regardless of how it looks, right?
Yeah, I have this saying, and I can't remember if we talked about it in the official podcast, is I think that people's view of how their body looks and works is they have the wrong reference point. So what happens is what people often do is they want the body of an Instagram model, male or female. And what happens is those people, that's their full-time job, is to look like that. They also are like in their early 20s.
Yeah.
Often, right? They're youthful. And youth, you can go pretty far, you know, in terms of fitness when you're very young.
Not a helpful standard.
It's not a helpful standard. I think the standard should be, am I making the most out of my body? Like, am I looking as good as I can look given the kind of body I have? So I have a very long, lean body, which is very nice. If I want to lose fat, I can actually lose fat. I'm close, you know, I'm 49. I can get a six pack.
Right.
You know, I can do that.
Yeah.
Most 49-year-old men could never do that. Now, what I can't do, and what I tried to do when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, was I tried to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like, so if I wanted to try to look like a bodybuilder, I could lift weights. I could eat 10,000 calories and squat like crazy and do bench press, and I'll never have that kind of body. Right. I mean, I'll be more muscular, but I won't have that kind of body.
Yeah.
What helped me was that I learned to compare my body to the way it used to look, to the way it could look, without concern, without comparing it to yours, to Arnold's, to anyone else's. And I think that was like a big change for me as a man.
Yeah.
To become I look good.
For me.
For me. I look
Totally.
good for me. Yeah.
And I think to take that a step further, I think you can be really proud of a body that allows you to do what you want to do in your life.
That's even more important.
So if you want to be a dancer, a modern dancer, and you can do that thing really well, and you feel really good about your body's ability to move with some of those, I think, pretty complex movements, regardless of how it looks, I think you should feel pretty proud of your body that it can do those amazing things.
I think one example of this is you do not have to be skinny to run a marathon.
True.
right? Like the idea that you could do something that is hard.
Ironman triathlon, same thing.
Yes. You can do something very difficult that's challenging physically, but you don't look like the kind of traditional,
The professional.
yes. I think is a nice example is, can your body do what you want it to do? Yes, it can run 26 straight miles.
Yes,
That's a feat,
totally.
for the average person.
And I think looking good naked is, being proud of your body is part of
That's right.
looking good naked.
Yeah, that if you're like, this body can run 26 miles.
Hell yeah.
I can show it to you in the bedroom. I'm not embarrassed by it, kind of thing. I think that's great.
Proud of it.
So this notion of eating being a big part of looking good naked.
Yeah.
Right. So if that is part of your goal, and I think it's a reasonable goal for people to have,
Yeah.
especially if you're single, right? Especially if you're solo,
Yeah.
and you have, you are dating. What, in your opinion, I know we're getting a little outside your expertise, but what, in your opinion, are like the main basics of eating, if that's the goal?
That's a really hard question because I think it's different for every person at some level. I'm the last person that's going to make rules in my own work.
Right.
And I think with food, it's even harder, partly because there's a lot of pseudoscience and you have a lot of rules anyway.
It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do research on nutrition.
Yeah.
Because when you change one thing, you often change multiple things.
Yeah. Right. True. I think we talked earlier in the podcast about this idea of moderation.
Yes.
And I don't like to demonize any foods.
Okay.
Or, there are some foods maybe you could argue are harder on our bodies than others.
Yes.
But I think, finding moderation is important, especially with things like sugar.
Yes.
We know that a lot of people respond poorly to eating high carbohydrate diets. And so if you're one of those people, that's probably a nutrient that you really want to monitor.
Okay.
Whereas other people don't have that problem as much, so they may not have that rule. And that's why I have trouble sometimes making hard and fast rules about food.
Okay, then how about that? So first of all, I will say this is that like cutting back drinking to some moderate level
It's a no-brainer.
Is a no-brainer.
It's a good rule if you're going to make one.
Cutting back on like a lot of highly processed foods with sugar is probably a no-brainer.
Right. And alcohol is basically sugar.
Is the same thing.
It just converts.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's a few of those kinds of things. So eating more fruits and vegetables seems like a no-brainer.
Always good.
Yes, right. So there's some things that are probably okay. But suppose a person's listening and they go, okay, I exercise. I do feel good about my body, but I do want it to look better. And I know that if I eat better, both my exercise will get better, my mood will get better, and I'll look better naked.
Well said.
Where do they go, given that they may have an individual need? You know what I mean? Like, I get it. I can see that like how in the same way that you can't prescribe the same exercise program to 5 different people, you can't prescribe the same nutrition program to 5 different people.
How do you
find a good nutritionist or a good person, a good expert to help you with this?
Yeah, how do you seek out the right information?
Yeah, right.
Especially knowing that there's so many people now sharing information in different ways.
Yes.
It's almost more confusing sometimes to know, should I look at keto? Should I look at paleo?
That's right. The zone diet.
Which diet thing do I choose?
Yes.
That's a great question. We were talking earlier, Pete, you and I, about like finding things if you're trying to look good naked and you're trying to find an exercise plan that works for you.
Yes.
Seek out things that are joyful, so that they're sustainable, so that you can do them over time.
So find foods that you like to eat that are going to enhance this is one of the things.
Find a diet philosophy that sort of resonates for you and try it and see what happens. I mean, we're all experiments of one. So, there's no harm in using yourself as a laboratory just to see how you respond.
Yes.
And I think don't rely on other people to tell you that, but go seek it out. And at the same time, I'm always encouraging people with exercise to mix things up because we're wired for novelty. We're wired for change. And so just like you might, seek out dancing for a little while. Once you do that, you might say, I need to put that away.
Mm-hmm.
I need
And you can do some boxing, which is one of our episodes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant. And so I think with food, it's the same way. I think we crave novelty, we crave change. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a nice way to make it, keep ourselves disciplined, is to constantly be curious and seeking and learning new things about ourselves. It's really the only way that you're going to find answers to that question, I think.
Yeah. That's I think that's good advice. I really like the idea of figuring out something that works for you.
Yeah.
That idea. Charlie, well, thank you for sticking around and doing a little extra bonus conversation today.
Yeah, I love talking with you, Pete. Thanks for having me on the show.
I love it too. Cheers.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.